The number one question that I get asked on this channel all the time is, what's your opinion of Weevi? Well, more specifically, there are quite a few node-based creation tools on the market in the world of generative AI creativity. So in this video, I thought it'd be really helpful to take a look at some of the major tools that are available to you and talk about the pros and cons of using them inside a professional workflow. This video specifically is going to cover everything you would need to know, including the creative potential and the overall cost of using these tools. By the end of this video, you'll have a really good context of when to use node-based creativity tools inside your creative pipeline, and you'll know once and for all, are these tools overrated or are they actually helpful for your production projects? I hope you enjoy. Let's hop in. So my name's Caleb. Welcome to Curious Refuge. Be sure to like and subscribe if you want more tutorials like this in the near future. Now, if you've seen our review of common AI aggregators, I highly recommend checking out that video first, where we get into some of the more application-based tools available to you as a creative AI artist. It's a really helpful masterclass on the latest aggregators available to you as a creative professional. But this video specifically is all about node-based aggregators. So there are quite a few node-based aggregators out there, but this video is going to focus on 4 of the most popular: Weevi, Flora, Freepik Spaces, and Comfy UI. So let's kick things off by talking about why in the world would you ever want to use a node-based aggregator? And the quick answer to that requires a demo. So let's hop in and take a look at these tools for ourselves. So if you're already familiar with the creative process utilizing generative AI tools, then you probably utilize some sort of aggregator in your day-to-day workflow. Perhaps it's Freepik or Krea. There are all sorts of aggregators that are out there that allow you to pull from different models and generate in a single place. Now, for example, inside of Freepik here, I'm in their normal application window. You have the ability to, for example, create an image, and we can select Google Nano Banana 2. You can upload your images in one spot and then type in a prompt. They also have different settings that you can adjust, and ultimately you can generate your image. Now let's compare that against a node-based workflow. Inside a node workflow, you essentially are going through a very similar creative process, but you have more fine-tuned control into what happens at each step of the process. So let's create a quick little scenario here. Let's say that you are working on developing a soda company and you want to create some key art for what the overall aesthetic will look like of the actual can and marketing experience. Well, in order to do that using an application, you probably would just go to an aggregator like this, and you would select Google Nano Banana 2 or some sort of image generator. And then you would paste in a prompt and then upload any supporting imagery if it made sense. For this example, let's just pretend we're at the very early stages of creative ideation and we don't know what we're looking for. So I have a quick little prompt here. We'll go ahead and generate it 4 times in 16:9 and go ahead and hit generate. And after a few seconds, we have a few different images here. Of course, it could be a back and forth process to pick and choose the right one for the specific project that you're working on. But for the sake of this example, let's just say we really like this image here and we want to use it as a jumping off point. Okay, so let's say that we like that design and now we want to change it to be a different flavor or different style. Well, all you have to do is drag and drop that image into the image upload section and we can change our prompt. So we quickly put together a prompt here. We're going to go ahead and generate that 4 times and go ahead and hit generate. And again, after a few seconds, we have a few different variants of what that potential soda layout can look like. And you can see it took in our prompt and it actually looks pretty decent. Now, this entire process took about 90 seconds. It didn't take long at all, but the problem is, what if you wanted 10 different flavors? Or what if you wanted 100 different flavors of this specific soda? How would you pull that off at scale? Well, you could go in by hand and change each and every prompt and then ultimately get the creative assets that you're looking for. And if you're looking for maximum control, then maybe that is the ideal workflow for you. But if you used a node-based system, you would more easily be able to lock in your creative assets and only change the specific parts that you're looking to change from image to image. If really all you're trying to do is make a small change, whether it's stylistically or with your character, character, then a node-based workflow can be a very fast way to go about the creative process. Let's take the same example inside a node-based workflow. So it all starts with a text prompt, and you can see we're here inside of Freepik Spaces, which is one of the node-based workflow tools on the market. So it all starts with a text prompt box here, and you can see if you go over to this plus icon, you can add in all sorts of different nodes here. For our example, we're just going to stick with a very basic text prompt, but you could bring in an AI assistant if you wanted to. So we typed in our quick little prompts here, took our text output. So on the right side of the nodes, you will see an output, and that needs to get connected to an input. Now, if you wanted to create your own image generator, you would just click plus, and then you could bring in an image generator, a video generator, image upscaler. All of those things are available right there in the platform. So we took the output of our text, connected it to the input of our image, and this is essentially now a text prompt that will be used to generate our image. You'll also see that we have a reference image section. So this is important for any AI image models that have the ability to bring in reference images. Of course, popular models include tools like Nano Banana Pro. So using this image node, we were able to generate a few different images here, and I like this first one, so we're going to stick with that one. Okay, so now that we have the base image that we're working with, it's time to move on to the part where we actually create the variants, and it all starts with a simple text prompt. So I have a text prompt here that is essentially asking for 5 different styles of advertisement that we can use for our creative project, and you can see that text gets inputted into this text section of our brand new assistant node. So again, we went to node, we brought in an assistant node. And an assistant node is essentially a language model. So in this case, we're using Gemini 3 Pro. You could use 3.1 Pro if you want. It entirely depends on whatever you're looking for. And you can see in running this task, we were able to get 5 different prompts that we can use for our next step of the process. So the other thing that you will want to look for inside a node tool is the ability to export as a list or as a batch. Part of the beauty in working with a node is having the ability to bring in a lot of assets, run them through the exact same process, and get a lot of assets in return. It essentially just saves you the process of having to manually go in by hand and drag and drop and go through that very tedious process. So you can click export as a list, and now you can see we have all of our individual prompts broken down into an individual list. There's 10 different prompts, and we can take the output and connect it as the input of our text for a new image generator. And then for the reference, we can pull from our original image here, and we can generate up to 10 images at a time directly here inside of Freepik. And that gives us a few different variants. So we have our first one here, we have our second, our third, and our fourth. You get the idea. So we were able to create a workflow for getting a consistent output again and again. So the value proposition is essentially you can create a simple sequential node-based workflow, and at any time you can change out one of the elements inside of the workflow and you don't break the entire process. If you're used to working inside a professional creative landscape, then you're probably already familiar with a node-based workflow inside of tools like Nuke or DaVinci Resolve. Nodes allow you to create a procedural workflow and have much more fine-tuned controls over the outputs. Now, specifically in the world of generative AI, I think these workflows are really helpful if you have tasks that you do again and again and again with only slight variance. I feel like this is most easily exemplified through branding or ad agency work. A lot of times you may need 200 different assets with small changes depending on where the specific project is going to be distributed, or maybe it's a language that needs to be translated into something else. As long as you know the specific output that you're looking for, these node-based workflows can get rid of some of the tedious parts of the process. But it doesn't mean that it gets it right 100% of the time. So that's a quick context about when you might want to use node-based aggregators inside of your creative workflow. And I'll get into why you may not want to use them a little bit later inside of this video. But first, I want to take a look at specific tools and talk about the pros and cons of using each one. So the first tool that I want to talk about is Flora. So Flora is a node-based aggregator that recently raised $42 million. And it has a lot of the features that you may want inside a node-based experience. You have the latest image models, video models, you can bring in text, language models, and all of them are wrapped into a pretty easy to use user interface. Now, there are a few things that make Flora kind of interesting. The first is they have this feature called Fauna that has the ability for you to type in a prompt and then an AI agent will actually put together a workflow for you. So if you have some sort of creative outcome that you're looking for, let's say you want to be able to upload an image and change the clothing based on some assets that you bring into the system, it will automatically create that workflow for you. That's really important, but I think that this experience hints at something interesting that we'll talk about in just a little bit. They also have a technique section, which is basically a bunch of presets and defined workflows that other people have created. It's really helpful for, I think, getting inspiration and just seeing how other people are thinking about the tool. And when you're editing inside of Flora, it's very similar to other tools. You have the ability to bring in inputs and create outputs, and the entire thing makes sense. It's pretty easy to use. And when you're ready to generate, all you have to do is select the items that you want to generate and then go ahead and click that play button. Now, for the sake of creating an even playing field here, I want to use the exact same demo that we used for our aggregation tutorial. Essentially, we want to simulate the process of putting together a 2-minute long short film and think about how long it would take you to generate that film and then how much it would cost you. To pull this off, you're going to need to generate at least 48 shots, which will take you 10 images to pick and choose the right one for your specific scene. And then it will take you 5 video clips once you've determined which image will be used for your shot. Ultimately, you're going to create 480 images and around 200 video clips. So to create this 2-minute long short film using the credit system inside of Flora, it cost $291.20. That's 48,000 credits for images and 315,000 credits for video. So video is really where all of this adds up. And then in terms of time, it took about 30 minutes to generate all of the images and 7 hours and 20 minutes to generate the videos. That doesn't include prompting or going back and forth. That's just the raw generation time. So in total, for rendering alone, it took 7 hours and 50 minutes to create our short film, coming in at a total cost of $291. So next up, let's talk about Weevi. So Weevi is one of the, if not the most popular node-based aggregator on the market, and they were recently acquired by Figma for, let me check my notes here, $200 million. So good for them. So Weevi is specifically interesting because it gives you much more fine-tuned controls than some of the other node-based aggregators on the market. So just like Flora, you'll see they have a workflow library at the top that has preset templates available to you if you want a jumping off point. And very similar to other node-based tools on the market, you have inputs, you have outputs. I find that Weevi really does a good job at really systematically breaking down where the inputs come from, which I think is pretty helpful. And then it will give you the correct amount of outputs depending on the node you have selected. Now, Weevi is pretty interesting. For example, in this node-based workflow we inputted the brand assets for Curious Refuge, and we basically wanted to visualize what a bunch of product offerings might look like. And you can see it automatically created just a bunch of images of potential things that maybe we would want to give away at Curious Refuge. We also created a system that would take an input image and then do a bunch of color grading variants to that image. And you could hypothetically hop in and pick and choose the right one stylistically that makes sense for the project that you're working on. Now, the thing that makes Weevi really special is the fact that if you go to the toolbox here, you're going to see a lot more than just base models. You're going to see everything from having fine-tuned control over the color channels to specific things like a compositor or a painter that gives you the ability to paint directly inside of the canvas. You also have the ability to do advanced things that you may be used to in other compositing applications like Photoshop. For example, you can bring in a matte and then shrink and grow that matte based on the size that's projected from the image tool that you're working with. They have tools that automatically create depth maps. You can bring in LoRa models, which is really important if you have a specific style that you're looking for. And just altogether, they're really thinking about things at a high level. Now, that all comes at a cost though, because Weevi can be quite confusing if you are new to a node-based workflow experience. That's not to say that it's impossible to use. It can just take some time to get things set up. If you create a workflow, it's probably going to take you anywhere from 10 minutes to up to a few hours if it's a much more complex workflow. But the specific fine-tuned control is why Weevi is essentially the industry standard at the high-end agency level. So let's talk about price. Weevi does not specifically design itself to be the cheapest tool on the market, and it doesn't really need to because it's definitely shooting for more of the enterprise level users. Now, in order to create the short film utilizing Weevi, it cost $677, and it took 13 hours and 10 minutes. So now you're beginning to see some of the problems when you're utilizing some of these node-based workflows. A lot of times they can be much slower than a traditional iterative experience that you may see inside a normal aggregation tool like Freepik or Google Flow. The next tool I want to talk about is Freepik Spaces. So Freepik Spaces is built into Freepik, which is my personal favorite aggregator, and it has the ability to do a lot of the things we've already talked about inside of this video. Now, it does not have all of the nodes that you have inside of Weevi, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. So if you go to the plus icon inside of Freepik Spaces, you can see there's just a bunch of different nodes that you can select to bring into your specific workflow experience. I think having the ability to seamlessly jump back and forth between a node-based workflow and an application is just much more conducive for the creative experience. And if we take a look at the cost of using Freepik, it would be about $250 to create the short film and take you about 16 hours of total generation time, which is much longer than if you just used the application-based version of Freepik. So if you're looking to save more time and money, it makes more sense to use the application version. So with all of this being said, the big question is, when should you actually use node-based workflows inside creative projects? Well, I think the answer to that first has to start with you need to understand what your workflow is to begin with. Utilizing nodes is helpful, but if you don't know the creative goal that you're trying to get to or what the workflow will actually be like, you're going to waste a lot of time setting things up whenever it would be 10 times easier just to drag and drop your elements inside an aggregator. If you're not going to do something 5 times or more, then it's kind of pointless to use a node-based workflow because it's going to take you so long to set up the creative process. Node-based workflow tools also live in this weird in-between space because if you're trying to meticulously edit a shot, specifically for a film project or large creative project that requires fine-tuned control, then you actually probably want to take that asset and have a more hands-on approach to the creative workflow, because there's just going to be small things that you run into utilizing node-based workflows. For example, even inside this demo example from Weevi, we have this consistent character creator, and you can see this is the original starting character that we have here, which, okay, is fine. But then whenever we generated our consistent character, their eye color is completely different. And so if the eye color is different inside this predefined node, that's going to be a problem, and you would need to go in and meticulously go back and forth and change out the image model, and you're always going to have to do that versus just utilizing the latest and greatest image model directly inside an aggregation tool. I also think these tools are really good for creating procedural workflows where you can create a really interesting trailer concept or kind of vibe for what you want your project to be like. But when it actually comes to fine-tune control and getting the exact shots or sequences you need for a creative film project, it's honestly going to be more frustrating than helpful utilizing a node-based workflow like this. The big exception to that rule would be if you're really just doing stylistic changes. Let's say that you have live action images and you want to make them look like they're 2D animated, or you have multiple characters that need to have their face swapped so that they're a single character. Repeat processes like that are what node-based tools are all about. So my quick recommendation would be, if you are dead set on utilizing a node-based workflow and there's a consistent outcome that you're looking for, then if money is no object, then Weevi is the way to go. But if you're wanting maximum creative flexibility and you really enjoy getting into those creative flow states, then Freepik Spaces is, in my opinion, the best tool on the market. Now, the other thing that we need to talk about is Comfy UI. So Comfy UI is specifically designed to be an open source workflow that allows you to run node-based workflows locally on your machine. In the early days of generative AI, essentially everyone was very enthusiastic about using Comfy UI because you essentially can create things for free as long as your machine has the ability to run the models. That continues to be the case. The problem is Comfy UI can be quite confusing, and as AI systems change, you have to update your workflows on a regular basis. And I personally like having engineers go through the process of doing creative debugging. I don't want to do that. I want to focus on being creative inside my craft. So I do think Comfy UI is helpful, especially if you need deep control over the data and the models that you're working on. It's just a big pain, and I find that most artists get frustrated with it in the end. So the big question is, okay, we have all of these node-based workflows. Are they here to stay, or are they going to be replaced by a creative tool in the near future? Well, if I had to bet, I would be willing to bet that they probably will be replaced by some sort of AI agentic workflow experience sometime in the future, but I don't think that future date is anytime soon. So if you work with a large team and you need maximum procedural control, then node-based tools are the way to go. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to learn more about working inside these node-based tools, including Weevi, I highly recommend checking out our training over at Curious Refuge. We work with some of the world's best artists to put together node-based workflow tutorials that go into much more detail than I was able to get to inside of this video. And as always, if you want to learn the latest AI workflows, I highly recommend checking out our courses at Curious Refuge. We train artists at every major studio and in over 170 countries, and we would love to have you inside the program. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe to get the latest video tutorials right here on the platform. We'll see you in the next one.